5 years into his tenure as president of basketball operations, the genius of Brad Stevens is undeniable but widely misunderstood. He receives massive praise for building championship rosters and making blockbuster trades. But the true brilliance of his executive career lies in the subtle margins of roster management. Today we are going to explore 9 of the most underrated decisions Stevens has made over the last 5 years. To be perfectly clear, we are excluding his obvious massive home run moves. Bringing Al Horford back and trading for Drew Holiday were franchise-altering decisions everyone already celebrates. We are also excluding the draft picks and the development of deep bench players into rotation pieces. This breakdown focuses exclusively on the quiet and brilliant moves that secretly kept Boston at the top of the mountain. We will look at these moves in chronological order to see exactly how Stevens built his masterpiece. The first vastly underrated move happened when Stevens acquired Josh Richardson. When Stevens transitioned from head coach to the front office, people questioned his executive instincts. One of his first major tests was using the remaining Gordon Hayward trade exception. He decided to use it on Richardson, who was coming off a truly disastrous season with the Dallas Mavericks. Fans and media critics were incredibly confused by the move. The confusion only grew louder when Stevens immediately gave Richardson an extension. But the decision paid off beautifully as Richardson shot the ball incredibly well from beyond the arc. He provided quality individual defense and helped stabilize the team during a very turbulent early season stretch. The most important part of acquiring Richardson was what it allowed Boston to do later. Richardson became the key financial piece needed to trade for Derek White. If Stevens never takes a chance on Richardson, the Derek White trade never happens. That single domino effect completely changed the trajectory of the franchise forever. The second deeply underrated move was trading away Tristan Thompson. When Stevens took over the front office, he had to clean house after a very frustrating and mediocre year. He immediately started reshaping the culture by trading Kemba Walker for Horford. But Tristan Thompson was widely considered one of the hardest players to get rid of on that roster. Thompson had been a massive free agency bust for Boston on the court. Even worse, there was intel suggesting he was a serious problem inside the locker room. Some players tried to deny the rumors, but the negative noise surrounding Thompson was impossible to ignore. Bringing Horford back made Thompson completely expendable. But trading his contract seemed impossible. Stevens somehow managed to find a taker by shipping Thompson to the Sacramento Kings. If Boston had to eat that salary or keep him around, it could have severely damaged team chemistry. Stevens proved right away that he could erase mistakes and protect his locker room culture. The third vastly underrated move was having the restraint to let Evan Fournier walk away in free agency. Fournier was a very complicated situation for the Boston front office. He caught a terrible virus right after being traded to Boston and never truly found his rhythm. The general consensus was that Boston should bring him back on a reasonable contract. But the New York Knicks offered Fournier a massive deal that Stevens flatly refused to match. Acquiring Richardson basically confirmed that Fournier was moving on from Boston. The Knicks quickly realized that paying Fournier was an absolute disaster of a decision. His production swiftly declined and his massive contract became a giant burden for New York. If Stevens had caved and paid Fournier the Boston cap, situation would have been completely ruined. They would never have had the financial flexibility to acquire Malcolm Brogdon or Derek White. Sometimes the best trades are the contracts you completely avoid signing. The fourth brilliant move was a masterclass in salary cap manipulation. Stevens brought in players like Malik Fitz and Nick Stauskas at the trade deadline. He also signed Juwan Morgan to fill out the very end of the bench. These players offered almost zero on-court value, and fans were deeply confused by the signings. But Stevens was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. The very next summer, all 3 of those specific players were used as salary filler. They were absolutely essential for matching money in the trade that brought Malcolm Brogdon to Boston. Stevens used this exact same strategy multiple times with other veteran players. He signs players to specific contract numbers knowing they can be bundled in future trades. It is a tedious and unglamorous part of being an executive, but it wins championships. The fifth incredibly underrated decision was refusing to panic sign Carmelo Anthony. Boston originally signed Danilo Gallinari to be their primary bench scorer. But Gallinari tragically tore a knee ligament right before training camp started. The immediate instinct across the league was that Boston needed to sign Carmelo Anthony. Anthony was a proven veteran scorer, and reports suggested Boston was seriously considering the move. But Stevens held his ground and refused to pull the trigger on a flashy name. He believed deeply that Sam Hauser could step up and fill that specific shooting role. Hauser is a completely different player than Gallinari, but his shooting was exactly what Boston needed. More importantly, Hauser was a far more capable defender than an aging Carmelo Anthony. Opponents would have ruthlessly targeted Anthony on defense, but Hauser held his own perfectly. Stevens trusted his internal development program over a famous name, and it paid off massively. The sixth underappreciated move was signing Blake Griffin as emergency depth. Boston brought Griffin in at the very last second when they desperately needed front-court insurance. Griffin was no longer the high-flying superstar he was in his prime, but he completely bought into his role and became an excellent spot starter for Boston. When Griffin started at center, the team went on an incredible 13-3 run. He was not carrying the offense, but he kept the ball moving and played extremely smart basketball. Perhaps his greatest contribution came behind closed doors in the locker room. When Peyton Pritchard was struggling to accept a smaller role, Griffin became a vital mentor to him. Griffin taught the younger players how to sacrifice personal stats for team success. Stevens proved he could find invaluable leadership and production in the most unlikely places. The seventh major underrated move was letting Grant Williams walk away. Grant Williams was one of the most divisive players to put on a Celtics uniform this decade. He had moments where he looked like a core piece of the future. He also had stretches where his decision-making was incredibly detrimental to the team. During his final contract year, the mental pressure clearly got to Williams. He made poor choices on the court and eventually forced Joe Mazzulla to bench him. While Williams eventually earned his rotation spot back, the decision to extend him was very complicated. Many executives would have paid him just to avoid losing an asset for nothing, but Stevens saw the situation clearly and orchestrated a trade with the Dallas Mavericks instead. Keeping Williams would have cost Boston significant money and perhaps future draft capital. Williams struggled in Dallas and was eventually traded to Charlotte, where he has been mediocre at best. Nobody looks back at that decision and thinks Boston made a mistake letting him go. Stevens correctly evaluated the player and moved on before the contract became an anchor. The eighth underrated move was trading for Xavier Tillman to bolster the front court. Tillman was never supposed to be a massive star for the Celtics. He was brought in strictly for depth behind Porzingis and Horford. But every single championship team needs an unexpected contribution from a role player. When Porzingis went down with an injury, Boston desperately needed big men to step up. Tillman proved to be incredibly valuable in specific playoff matchups against Indiana and Dallas. He hit a legendary corner three-pointer in the finals that fans will remember forever. After the championship run, Tillman dealt with knee surgery and lost some of his effectiveness. Boston kept him around for his veteran presence until they simply had to save money. But acquiring him at the perfect moment was a subtle move that directly contributed to a banner. The ninth and final underrated move was trading away Georges Niang. Niang was an incredibly solid regular season contributor for Boston, but he was a bit redundant on a roster that already featured elite sharpshooting wings like Hauser. Stevens eventually traded Niang to the Utah Jazz in what was essentially a pure salary dump. It was a cold and calculating move to create financial breathing room for the franchise. But the decision aged perfectly as Niang suffered a stress injury in his foot. He missed the entire next season while Boston was able to duck critical luxury tax penalties. Stevens saved the organization millions of dollars by trading a player who ended up being unable to play. All 9 of these moves highlight a specific pattern in how Brad Stevens operates. He removes emotion from the equation and makes decisions based purely on future flexibility. He knows when to cut bait on a problematic player and when to trust an unproven young prospect. While the blockbuster deals get all the headlines, these subtle moves are the true foundation of a dynasty. Stevens has proven that a brilliant front office can engineer success from the margins of a roster. He cleans up messes quickly and sets the board perfectly for his next big strike. It is this quiet excellence that makes him the greatest basketball executive of his generation. What do you think was his smartest subtle move over the last 5 years? Let us know your thoughts below, and we will see you in the next deep dive.